This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow for the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by Maura Donnelly, my co-host. Hi, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
Well, we've had the midterm elections.
We have.
Did you vote?
Oh, of course, absolutely.
I thought that you might be first in line.
Well, maybe not quite first in line, but definitely voted.
Well, was it a blue wave, Maura?
I've heard it described as a blue ripple, but I'm not sure all the votes are counted yet. So
you're kidding.
We don't know.
You're kidding. After this long a period of time, where would votes be remaining that needed to be counted?
I think there were some resolved recently, but as we air, we're somewhere in Florida, maybe.
Oh yes, I've understand that there's so much. It's such a temptation to go to the beach that no one wants to count votes, and they want to hang out at the beach instead. This brings back the year 2000 to memory, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I think a lot of people are making some comparisons. So
only now we don't have hanging chads, and now we have Brenda Snipes from Broward County opening ballots in secret, and we have all kinds of interesting irregularities there, Georgia as well, and we'll have to wait and see how these things shake out. But
well, hopefully it will all get sorted out.
This brings back, Tom Corbett wasn't crazy after all. I think Tom Corbett was on to something when he wanted to talk about voter fraud and make sure that none of it happened in Pennsylvania. But then we remember the Bruce Marks situation where, remember Bruce Marks?
Vaguely.
The state Senate candidate from South Philly. He was a Republican running in a district that he grew up in. And he was a lawyer, and he was beloved by the community, and they actually elected him to the state Senate. But the next day, his opponent, deputy mayor and hairdresser, Mr. Stinson, Henry Stinson, said, "Oh, we have all kinds of absentee ballots here that haven't been counted." And they did things such as going to homes of people that didn't vote. And they said, "Didn't you know there's a Don't Miss a Vote program? You can fill out your ballots today and vote." And they took those ballots in. And we found out that, of course, Henry Stinson was seated as the state senator for a year and a half. And what did our state courts do about it? That's right, absolutely nothing.
Nothing that I recall.
Absolutely nothing. We have someone here,
an expert,
a guest who can talk about this and some of the most important topics that are on the horizon for Pennsylvania. Would you introduce him?
Sure. We are really, really very happy to have Mr. Gene Barr with us here today, who is the president of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
You're one of those people in the know, so we love having you on the show.
Well, that's good to know.
Sure. Well, we just talked about, what year were we talking, 1980?
It was 92 or 3. It's been a while.
Yeah. Which
for the Bruce Marks?
Oh, that was like 1990.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's bring it forward a little bit. So,
sure.
So what are your thoughts on what happened in Pennsylvania during the midterms? And would you call it a blue wave?
I don't know that I'd call it a blue wave. Maybe somewhere between a ripple and a wave. We certainly anticipated. Let's look first at the State House and State Senate, which is what we typically deal with. We anticipated some losses in the Southeast. I think the losses were a bit more than we thought that they were going to be. As we sit here right now, the Republicans who had 34 votes out of 50 in the State Senate are down to 29, maybe 28, but I think it'll hang at 29 right now as we sit here. The one of the Bucks County seats, the one that's previously been held by Senator Tomlinson, was within 100 votes.
Wow.
There's a second House race, Representative Bud Cook. It looks like he's going to hold in. That's only a couple dozen votes, as I understand it. So this goes back to the old, your vote matters when we get into that.
Yeah.
So will probably be 5 from 34 to 29 on the state Senate. The Democrats picked up probably a net of 11 seats in the state House. And so what it did is it certainly narrowed those historic margins. As somebody said, well, we've got historic margins. You wouldn't anticipate that they would go up. When we look at the Pennsylvania congressional side, the Democrats flipped a net of 3 seats. So we started the year at 13 Republicans, 5 Democrats. We finished the year at 9 Democrats and 9 Republicans in our congressional district. The trouble is, after all we've gone through this year with the Connor Lamb special election, that state Supreme Court deciding to bring new powers to themselves to redistrict. We're going to have to go through this now in another couple of years after the census comes out. And Pennsylvania will probably lose a seat because other states are growing at a higher rate than we are. We're kind of chugging along at the same level. So we flipped those three, and as noted, as we sit here, there's a couple of that are still going on. The Georgia gubernatorial race, the Florida Senate and gubernatorial races.
And the agricultural secretary.
And the agricultural secretary. So we still have those. But interestingly, at the national level, it appears, even with all this, the R's picked up seats in a year. So blue wave, probably not. Did the Democrats make out? Yes. And clearly, when you look at the best way to summarize Pennsylvania is continuing a trend, because for a number of years now, the Southeast has gotten bluer, the Western PA has gotten redder, and this election did nothing but continue to demonstrate that.
So no real big surprises in Pennsylvania?
Not huge. Look, there's, as you know, there's always that one race you kind of go, wow, I didn't know he or she was in trouble. And there were a couple of incumbents who were knocked off, the ones who were defeated in the Southeast. We kind of thought they were in trouble. Chester County has undergone massive political turnover. The courthouse turned over last year. This time there were 3 Republican incumbents who lost. There were a couple of reasons for that. In Delaware County, which historically has been one of the bastions of Republicanism, I grew up there, is down to 2 state reps and 1 state senator left in there. So there's been significant changes.
The war board has
the old war board
has melted away.
That's gone. It's gone.
What happened to it?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of reasons. You had people who are historically Democrat living in Philadelphia who have moved out into the suburbs, whether the suburbs happen to be Bucks, Montgomery, Chester, or Delaware County. You're seeing similar things actually happen now, I would say, in Lancaster County, where you've got people who kind of say, hey, I want a better opportunity for my kids. And they go out and they say, well, maybe the schools close in aren't any better than the Philadelphia schools. They go a little further out and say, I can't afford that. So what do? They wind up going even further. They're into eastern Lancaster County. So you're seeing some changes even out that far as well. But meanwhile, again, Western PA continues to turn over. Seats that have historically been Democrat have flipped over to the Republican side in many cases. There was just one again in Cambria County where a longtime Democrat flipped to Republican. Center County, there was one held by Mike Hanna for decades, Democrat. That flipped to Republican. His son was not successful in taking that seat over. So you're seeing those things continue in western part of the state.
I think the changes, Gene, would it be fair to say that the changes in the Southeast started just before Ed Rendell became mayor, because the city of Philadelphia was going downhill so quickly. I mean, I remember driving down there on one assignment or another from the state senate and watching the city slowly slide down the drain. And whether you loved Ed Rendell or hated him as governor, as mayor, I think he did a good job for Philadelphia. Firstly, renegotiating those labor contracts to salvage the finances of the cities. But up until that point, you had this large exodus of people out of Philly, just what you were saying, into those suburban counties.
Yeah, I think that's right. I would say it's the 90s, 2000s. I was telling somebody the other day, I was in local government in Delaware County, and the last year I ran, and granted it's a long time because I left Delaware County in '86 for a job opportunity. My precinct, which butted up against the city of Chester, 7 Republicans for every Democrat in my precinct in this borough of Upland in the mid-'80s. So you can see the turnover. And so that has happened. I think you're right. I think it's accelerated that. Again, people are going to look for opportunities for themselves. They want good schools for their kids. If they don't find them in the city of Philadelphia or somewhere else, they're going to try and find them elsewhere. And you've seen them migrate, but when they come out, they're typically not going to flip and go from Democrat to Republican. They're going to stay Democrat. So that has helped turn those collar suburbs around Philadelphia blue.
Well, it's interesting that here you have people fleeing for better schools, lower taxes, less crime, and they're going to Republican areas, but they're bringing their Democratic partisanship with them, and then what happens to those areas eventually? Now, of course, there's some exception to that, but where are the major problems in America? They're in cities, aren't they?
Well, actually, rural communities are experiencing issues now too. When you look at opioid abuse, it's probably just as bad or worse in the rural areas. So no one's immune from it, and it's part of a changing economy. And part of that is something that we at the Chamber are working on, which is getting our workforce development initiatives in order, because more and more we hear our employers can't find the people they need to fill jobs. And that holds everywhere.
Let's take a look at that. Let's go to the gubernatorial race.
Absolutely.
And give us a quick summary of how you felt the gubernatorial race went, why it went the way it did, and would the Republicans have been better off with Paul Mango at the top of their ticket?
Well, you also had Laura Ellsworth. So that's another question that you should ask.
Took the words right.
And I don't know the answer to that. Look, Scott Wagner, I don't know that I've ever seen anybody work harder than Scott Wagner for what he wanted to do. He was certainly committed to it, did hundreds of events. I think he made some statements during the campaign that he would like to have back, particularly the one near the end. It certainly didn't help him. I think he would agree with that. But look, Pennsylvania, since we've had governors who've been elected to 2 terms, we've typically elected them. Tom Corbett was the first exception. And I think there are a couple things, that happened there. People bought the big lie that Tom Corbett cut $1 billion from education. Complete myth, but yet it hurt him for that. So Tom Wolf has a second term. He ran an interesting campaign. He tried to stay out of the limelight, did one debate, happened to be our debate, which was nice. We enjoyed having that. And so I think that this kind of developed the way that we thought. And so now we're going to see what a Tom Wolf administration in the second term does when he's not running again.
What's next for Scott Wagner?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, look, Scott's got a couple of businesses. He's built them up from nothing. Here's a guy who is, as he argues, self-made. I think he's back into business. Does he run again for something? I don't know. He spent a lot of money on this. He self-funded a lot of what he did here, so I'm not sure.
We don't think he's going to go away, though.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, he's certainly not going to go away from Pennsylvania. I think he's going to continue to run his businesses, whether he tries for another elective office or not. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
So I'm curious about your thoughts on the dynamic between Wolf and Fetterman. How do you think that's going to
go? John Fetterman
could have 2 more different people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He's certainly one of the more interesting characters we've had in the lieutenant governor's seat. I think he was a little taken aback when he was told that the Senate rules require you to wear a coat and tie on the floor of the Senate.
Because
he's now the presiding. He bought him a tie in the commercial. He's now the presiding officer of the Pennsylvania Senate.
I haven't seen the pictures, but I hope there's some. I'm sure there will be some.
I can't wait to see the first time he comes out on the floor. That will be a historic event.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be a shrinking violet when it comes to being a lieutenant governor.
No, I don't believe so.
It's fascinating. He's announced that he's not going to move into the lieutenant governor's mansion in 40 Newtown Gap.
Correct.
He's given up that pool.
Well, and Governor Wolf he's spent some time, but typically he stays at his home, down in Mount Wolf.
Right.
Yeah, it would be good if Governor Wolf just gave him a room. In his house, and because Fetterman's not moving his family here, he said they're staying in Braddock.
I mean, they wouldn't have to put any more security in; they would just have it. So it would be all set.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think.
Will be. It will be. Yes.
What about the Senate race, Gene? Can you give us some background there? What kind of effort do you think Lou Barletta was able to make, and what does it take to knock off a Casey? Here's a senator who seems to do very little in Washington, D.C., quite frankly, and he's living off his father's legacy. Yeah. Everybody remembers his father fondly, and in Washington, D.C., he's standing for all the policies that are 180 degrees different from his father.
He's certainly more liberal than his dad. He's a guy who's never been touched by scandal. I think it's positive. He's perceived as a nice guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a nice guy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
A good family man. I think Lou Barletta closed the gap a little bit in the last few days. The trouble is, if you look at who has represented Pennsylvania from the Republican side, and let's lay aside, Pat Toomey for a minute, who I think has done an outstanding job in his office. Most have been moderate Republicans, just right of center. You think of the John Hines, the Arlen Spectors, Hugh Scott. So Lou was certainly much more conservative, is much more conservative than them. And when you get into the collar communities, having the blessing of President Trump was, to be blunt, not a positive, because we saw how that played out. Not only in the suburbs around Philadelphia, but in suburbs around the country, you saw that. And so I think that was one of the things that he ran into. His positions on immigration didn't play well in many areas. Lou has been very out front on that, going back to his days as mayor of Hazleton. So I think that was an issue. He was certainly outspent. You have government unions spending huge amounts of money these days, whether it's the U.S. Senator's race, the gubernatorial race, state House, state Senate seats are spending huge sums of money. So that's part of it.
I want to make sure we get to some of the legislative priorities for the Pennsylvania Chamber. We've got good revenue collections coming in so far. What do you anticipate with the 2019 budget?
That's a great question. I think last year when we did this, a lot of us said, oh boy, next year 2019 is going to be horrible. I think the reality is things are doing pretty well, and it's because of, I hate to use this word, the trickling down of the economy at the national level. What has been done has been tax reform, which has done tremendous work here in terms of driving the economy. But one of the things that gets mistaken and is arguably just as big or maybe bigger is what this administration has done in terms of cutting regulation. Finding unnecessary regulations, cutting the red tape that businesses talk about so often. And at the same time, when people talk about we have to address climate change, we're the only industrialized nation in the world that has cut our CO2 emissions. It is absolutely incredible. So we're doing these positives from an environmental side while the administration is reducing regulations and turning this economy loose to create prosperity and to move the country forward. It has been tremendous. I think that's going to be a positive next year for the 2019 budget. I think it's going to be, hopefully those dollars will continue to come in. We don't get the blip. We still have a long-running surge here. The market's still doing pretty good. A couple of blips there in October, but nothing major. If that continues, I think hopefully it will be a pretty good budget year. Now, that I would say the governor is going to want more money for education, so where does that come from? Good question. We still have pension problems. It's still about 15% of the general fund budget we're spending, most of that due to the retroactive benefit increase that was done in 2001. Not his fault, not this governor's fault. In fact, it was Republicans who did it.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the one thing Governor Ridge had hoped to leave Harrisburg on this great, receiving a lot of praise for doing that because the economy was strong and it looked like it was going to continue to get stronger. And so he made that leap and we're still paying for it, aren't we, Gene?
Unfortunately, that's true. There was a lot of misunderstanding about what results would be in the market. And of course, when that was done later, we all know what happened in September of 2001, and that caused significant problems.
So it sounds like a good place to start your discussions, the Chamber's discussions with the governor,
We'd like to have some more pension reform, no doubt about it.
Gene, we have so much more to talk to you about. Will you please come back soon?
Oh, absolutely will.
Okay, I'm sorry we're out of time, but we'll be back with the second segment right after this. Stay tuned.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Behind the Headlines is also brought to you by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. And on this particular segment of Behind the Headlines, Maura and I are pleased to welcome back to the show Bob Latham. Bob, you are the executive director of the Pennsylvania Associated Constructors. Is that not right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Good to see you, Charlie.
Good to see you. And you have a conference coming up here shortly.
We do. In the next couple of days, we're going to be hosting about 1,800 people down at Hershey. We sort of take over the whole Hershey Lodge.
Hershey Motor Lodge.
Hershey Motor Lodge. It is a joint conference that the industry, the private construction and engineering industry, runs with both PennDOT and the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. It's in its 40th year. And the purpose of this is information sharing so that we can build a better quality for the citizens of Pennsylvania. For 40 years, we've been gathering, looking at technical workshops and ways that we can improve our product and improve safety in highway work zones so that motorists can get around more freely and safely in the Commonwealth.
And I'm sure you'll have some information from all of your speakers after the event. Where can people go to see what happened at the event?
Absolutely. The website is apcfallseminar.com, so it's pretty simple, apcfallseminar.com. All of the presentations will be up there, information from the speakers, certain videos as well.
Great, that's great.
One of the things that we've talked about you on the show before, with the explosion of highway construction and maintenance, it seems everywhere up and down the eastern seaboard, certainly here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we've been concerned about work zone safety for the workers and for the motorists themselves, and we've talked about this. Right. Your organization has been one of the leaders in this effort to try to improve safety. Could you talk a little bit again about what you've done already and now what your organization hopes to do moving forward, Bob?
Well, certainly.
We have some good news.
Yeah, we have some good news. The legislature approved and Governor Wolf signed legislation which will allow automated speed enforcement in highway work zones. And one of the biggest problems, which we've talked about on the show many times, is motorists speeding through highway work zones. Yeah. The lanes shift. They can be dangerous. In order to build projects under traffic, because most of what we do now is rehabilitating and rehabbing and upgrading and repaving existing highways. You can't close them down. You can't close an interstate highway down for 6 weeks or a month while you rebuild a section of it. You have to do it in stages while traffic goes through. And we need people to slow down. And we saw the success that they had in Maryland with this legislation and with the laws that they have. And we mirrored it after that, and after a significant period of time, let's just say it finally was enacted. We're looking forward to implementing it next year. So one of the topics we're going to be talking about during our conference is jointly working together with the districts at PennDOT and the Turnpike. Those are the offices that manage projects in various areas, and how we're going to successfully implement this, so that motorists are not surprised. They get ample warning. They get ample notice that this process is in place, so they can plan to drive the speed limit through highway work zones.
So the good news is Maryland saw some pretty significant reductions in accidents, in speeding. This is not a money grab by any means. This is really designed to slow people down. And
the fines are significant. There are no points involved. The fines are significant, although Pennsylvania, one difference is your first offense will be a warning, which was built into the version of the bill. But in Maryland, there is no warning. So your second offense would be a pretty stiff fine, no points. But our hope, and our vision is that there will be zero income or zero revenue to the state for this, ideally, because there will be no fines, because people are driving the speed limit. You're right. You can, again, you drive south and drive into one of these work zones and see the whole line of traffic, the speeds just drop down. It really, really does work. And we've had a number of our members that have had fatalities. It's one of the worst things that can happen to a business owner or a PennDOT official, to have to go to that funeral or go to the hospital. And as one of our members said, the right of the workers to come home safe is certainly far greater than the right of somebody to break the law.
Well, you shared some statistics with us, which I think many of our viewers have not heard before, Bob. But when you consider that every week 14 motorists and 2 highway workers are killed in work zones, and those numbers are from your organization and from the National Highway Institute.
Right.
And that if we just slow down, speed accounts for, is found in 30% of all fatal crashes in America. And we find that even though we've been focusing on work zones, we find that crashes are increasing in work zones nationwide, aren't they?
Yeah, probably because there are more work zones. Unfortunately, that's the correlation. But on the other hand, we think that this legislation will go a long way to making things safer. And the
not
point
just
that you
for the
just
workers.
exactly,
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about the workers.
That's the point.
Really,
this is not
that shows more motorists like me and you
right.
are
exactly,
injured or killed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We, of course, from our standpoint, we represent the construction companies and the workers, but your point is very well valid. It's really more aimed at saving lives of people driving around the state.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those cattle chutes, they'll get you every time.
Well, we have a new governor now. A new
we
governor.
Do?
Sorry, we do have a new governor. It's the same.
Lieutenant governor.
Yes, it's the same person. But we have a new administration taking root in Harrisburg, and we just wondered if you have any new initiatives that you want to work with the administration as it begins its second term.
Well, I think some of those are funding based, but the other thing we're working with the department again is sort of an overarching quality theme and quality in construction, and we're going to be taking a hard look with our partners at PennDOT on new ways for bidding construction work, or what we call procuring construction work, looking at whether a combination of design and build is something that would be of value to Pennsylvania. That's where instead of the project drawings being done by one company and then the bidding is done on a low bid basis, you would take a combination of those two, where a consortium would design and build the project at the same time, and it would be negotiated. There are several different forms of that throughout the country. We don't have it here in Pennsylvania.
What's the benefit of that?
The benefit is sometimes you can get the construction people have a different viewpoint than the designers do. This way you can marry those expertises and sometimes get a better value or a better product.
Greater efficiency of the project.
And it can also, you're right, it can shorten the actual time from concept to final construction. The concern is that you have to make sure that it is done on a true professional value. It doesn't set up a system where somebody can pick and choose, because our low bid system has served the citizenry well for nearly 100 years, where you have a pre-qualified or qualified set of bidders, and then whoever is the low bidder, lowest responsible bidder, is the one that's selected, and it's all done on a numeric basis. When it gets subjective, there can be some concerns about favoritism there. So all those things have to. Yeah, the devil will be in the details there, but we are taking a look at that because it is being used successfully in other places.
We have to have you come back very soon here and continue this conversation, Bob. Yeah. Please promise us to do so.
Absolutely.
We'll be back with you again next week. Tune in for another episode of Behind the Headlines.